Aloha, everyone. This is Georgia Skinner, once again, Chief Officer of the Creative Industries Division, State of Hawaii, and founder of Creative Lab. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our Executive Director for Creative Lab Hawaii, Michael Palmieri. Michael's experience in the entertainment industry, as well as his compassion and leadership, have guided our fellows to build their skills, complete amazing projects, and now be able to compete in the global media landscape. I'm extremely proud of the milestones as well of our documentary, animation, and narrative filmmakers here in the state, who now lead, many of them, some Hawaii-based sister organizations to CLH, Ohina Labs, Pacific Islanders in Communications, Hawaii Women in Filmmaking, Good Pitch Hawaii, and of course, the Hawaii Filmmakers Collective, to name a few. All of these organizations collaborate to provide you with programs to advance your own careers. So let's get started. I'm happy to introduce the leader of HFC, Mary Michelle Pierce, an indie film producer who came to Hawaii in 2018. When not creating content, is the executive director of HFC, a membership-based organization focused on elevating and building a resilient, independent film collaborative for Hawaii. Her role as a creative producer, line producer, and first assistant director includes her participation in the 2019 Creative Lab web series Immersive, which resulted in her collaboration with writing partner and CLH fellow Stacy Fukuhara Barkley on the Hawaii-based web series, The Hilarious Like Mara. Please join me in welcoming our colleague, Mary Michelle Pierce. Take it away, Mary.
Thank you so much, Georgia. Yes, and thank you, Michael, for the opportunity to moderate this panel. I'm super excited to meet Jeff and hear what he has to say. First, I wanted to share with you a little bit about our webinar. This presentation brought by Jeff will be about 40 to 45 minutes, and we will leave 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end. Feel free to drop them in the Q&A portion, and we will be moderating those towards the end. So I'd like to introduce Jeff Gomez, CEO of Starlight Runner. He is one of the world's leading experts in story and narrative design. He works with executives, visionaries, and global leaders to maximize effectiveness of brand narratives, develop vast fictional story worlds, and produce highly successful transmedia franchises. In entertainment, Jeff has teamed up with top creative on properties such as Avatar, Pirates of the Caribbean, Transformers, Hot Wheels, Magic the Gathering, and Spider-Man. He has also written and co-produced hit comic books, graphic novels, video games, animated series, and virtual productions. As a game designer, Jeff has worked on the Halo, Splinter Cell, Need for Speed, and Turok franchises. Jeff is currently serving as a producer on the international relaunch of the Ultraman franchise by Subaraya Productions. In the corporate space, Jeff's brand strategy model of collective journey has propelled campaigns by Coca-Cola, Campbell's, and Nike to worldwide success. In the government and non-geo space, Jeff has also applied collective journey modality to geopolitical endeavors, social good, and transmedia population activations in Afghanistan, Mexico, Colombia, Australia, Canada, and of course the US. Jeff, it's so great to meet you. I'm excited for your presentation.
Well, thank you so much. That was pretty good, but I think you described somebody who's totally a nerd. Right? Totally. People, if my voice starts to judder or the visual gets messed up, just jump in and let me know, okay? So I'm going to share my screen if that's all right, Mary. Thank you so much for that.
Of course, looking forward to it.
Got it. Let me know if you can see the New York skyline.
Looks awesome.
Excellent, excellent. Okay. Well, hello, people. I'm Jeff Gomez, and I'm here to talk to you about building story worlds, creating the foundation that you will need to tell your story across multiple media platforms. I'm doing this especially for Michael and the Creative Lab in Hawaii, and I'm doing this for free. You're going to see why in just a few minutes, because You guys are very, very special to me. But I'm going to start with the fact that we are all faced with a significant challenge, a challenge that has grown exponentially over the past year. And essentially, it's the fact that all of us have stopped remembering how to use input select on our remote controls. We're not watching TV anymore, at least standard network television. The age of broadcast television is kind of over. And the age of massive broadcast, the types of broadcasting that encompasses everyone all at the same time, it's wrapping up, you know. The primacy of standalone theatrical features has been shaken over the past year. And frankly, we're getting tired of the standard kind of simplistic Hollywood hero's journey narratives, where there's a good guy, the good guy runs out into the world and encounters all kinds of friction, has to kind of beat up the bad guys, whether physically or psychologically, grab the treasure, go home and be the hero, and give everyone the benefit of his rightness. We want deeper, richer stories where we want our voices to be included in those narratives, especially now that we is not just Americans, we is everyone in the world. And if you don't do something about it, if you don't reflect different perspectives and diverse faces in your stories, well, we can go away, you know. And if it's unclear what you feel about us, and if it's if you don't have your facts straight or your narrative really down, you're going to confuse us, depress us, and again, we're going to go away, or worse, you're going to annoy us. And right now, if you piss people off, they now have the power to complain about it and express themselves and essentially take you out. So it's not that we need to be scared as storytellers, but we need to acknowledge that the world has changed and we need to be sensitive to it. The last point I want to make is that we have, before we get underway, is that we're living in a kind of science fiction time because we now have global, and I mean planetary, networks. The video is on demand, but the access to it is worldwide. And so the people who are looking for your stories need for those stories to be operational, to work around the world and to cultures that are only coming online right now. A little bit about me. I was born and raised on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. I experienced childhood in a projects building for low-income people. I'm a Latino, and I had it rough. I was a kind of imaginative kid in a world that lacked imagination. And so I sought to escape. The television was my portal to realms of imagination, but I wasn't interested in the kind of straightforward formulaic narratives that were on TV in the 1960s and 70s. I wanted my worlds to be grand. I wanted them big. I wanted them rich and deep. And I kind of wanted them a little bit serious. I didn't like when standard television episodes hit the reset button, where it's basically kind of the same situation every week or the same investigation every week. That's why I was drawn to Asian storytelling, particularly Japanese anime and a big kind of serialized movies like the Godzilla movies or the Planet of the Apes movies. And also I was drawn to books the literature of fantasy, particularly the big epic fantasy novels like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. I spent a lot of time in Puerto Rico when I was a kid, over the summers visiting with my dad. And in Puerto Rico, they showed these live action Japanese TV series like Ultraman and Ultra 7. And I was just blown away by the enormousness of these narratives and the power of the giant monsters and this tremendous silvery guy from space who came to protect us all. And now, why I'm talking to you. People, this is a photograph of the Honolulu International Coliseum in 1975, when the cast of Kikaider came to see us. The show was enormously popular. It was a series of 2 television series, which also had popular songs, feature films, toys and games, magazines. In essence, I was experiencing a transmedia storytelling for the very first time in my life. People, if you look at the pole on the right and go down 3 rows, that's me, Jeff Gomez, next to my buddy, the nerdy looking dude with the glasses and the smile, Sammy Rotella. And we were there at the HIC in Hawaii because I lived in Waikiki in 1974 and 75, and discovered Japanese media mix and the notion of a story world that extended across multiple media platforms. I am astounded that this photograph exists. I only discovered it a couple of years ago, and people, this is why I'm here, and it also is why I do what I do. I didn't stay in Hawaii for too long. My mom brought me back to the New York City, and it was the late 70s, a very dark time for the city. All the things that were bright and wonderful in Hawaii went away, and I became a kind of dark and angry teenager, stalking the streets of Times Square, sitting in movie theaters watching quintuple features of kung fu pictures or nasty horror films, with a copy of The Return of the King jammed into my back jeans pocket, where I was studying the appendices and trying to figure out how Tolkien created such a fantastic and realistic fantasy universe. It was in Puerto Rico on a bookshelf of a neighbor that I found this book, which actually was basically the instruction book. This book by Lynn Carter, who was a fantasy writer, took apart how exactly Tolkien figured out how to create the Lord of the Rings, the mythology, the language, the linguistics, the fact that he based his narratives on the prose Edda and all kinds of mythologies previous. It occurred to me at this point that writing, that storytelling was not entirely magical. There was a way to kind of assemble it. There was a narrative engine to it. You can piece it together the way some of my buddies were interested in car engines. It told me that, yes, you needed talent, but also you needed to understand how story worked. And from this point on, I devoted myself to learning narrative, the science of narratology. And I began to absorb stories worldwide across history and try to understand the commonalities and the structures of narrative. I wanted to become a storyteller but it was difficult for me to, sit down and write novels at 12 years old or 13 or 14. I didn't have the wherewithal to make movies or do much else except for play Dungeons and Dragons. Here you had a game that could be bought for 10 or 15 bucks, and it gave you everything you needed to invent a story world and to effectively tell a story to a group of people. Now, in my neighborhood, it wasn't easy to find other nerds. So I had to figure out how to tell stories to guys who really didn't want to be there. I wanted to, so I had to, first of all, lure them to my house with pizza and maybe a couple of cans of beer. And mom helped. I was lonely. And also, I talked to these guys individually and asked them questions about their wishes, their fantasies, their aspirations. And I actually tied those kind of psychological anchors into the fantasy story that I was telling with Dungeons and Dragons. And they recognized that I was listening to them. And that was extremely powerful. What it did was it had them come back week after week and explore this fantasy world that I had created, sometimes completely and entirely against the script that I had written. So I needed to kind of figure out how the entire world worked all at once so that it moved forward in time and yet accommodated my players wherever they would go. This was incredibly important for me, both the listening component and the notion that the world itself was functional on an ongoing basis. Time was passing, not just for my players, but for the characters they encountered and for the geopolitical situation on that world, for the monsters, for everything, to make it a kind of living, breathing universe. Along the way, and now we're in the mid-1980s, I discovered computers and the fact that it was possible to play these sorts of games through bulletin boards. Your typewriter was attached to a black and white CRT and plugged into a phone jack, and suddenly you were able to tell stories to other people and have them participate. It was crude, but I began to think very quickly about the fact that this wouldn't always be this way. We're going to have images, perhaps video. We're going to be able to talk to each other through these things. There's going to be color. We're going to be able to, I'd be able to be a dungeon master for hundreds of people or thousands or millions. And we'd be able to leverage these stories across multiple media platforms, sort of like Star Wars or Star Trek was just starting to do in the United States. But of course, just like how Japanese media mix had been doing since the 1960s, except with this kind of gray space in the middle. We did not have to lean back in our chairs. The screen didn't have to hold back the story. We would be able to move toward each other and interact with each other. We could play with each other. We could somehow participate in the narrative. In the 90s, I started thinking about how story could flow elegantly across multiple media platforms. And I began to become concerned because storytelling at that time still was repetitive. You went to the movie, you liked the movie, so you read the novel of the movie. That was the same story. And, they were starting to make video games out of movies. but they always sucked. They told the same story except stretched it out for hours, and they were terrible. We weren't going to be able to sustain this kind of repetitive cross-platform storytelling. Somehow I was dreaming of the ability to design story to work in different ways across different media, and reveal different aspects of a story world across that media. I started experimenting with this in the 1990s with Magic the Gathering and Turok Dinosaur Hunter, and they worked. Boy, did they really, really work. And so I formed my own company in 2000 called Starlight Runner Entertainment. A Starlight Runner is a friend who'd come to you anytime, day or night. It was just one of my little turns of phrases that kind of stuck. We became really good at being able to take a brand or a script or a concept and develop them into story worlds and expand them so that they could be operational across multiple media platforms in wonderful different ways. Along the way, I got to invent a few of these worlds. In fact, Magic the Gathering, the universe, Dominaria, a portion of that was based on my Dungeons and Dragons campaign. I had another campaign called Global Run 2020, and I adapted it to become Hot Wheels. I did not waste a thing. I started applying what I had learned to help my clients and partners to develop their transmedia story worlds. People, I told you that I started out in the worst of kinds of situations, in poverty, effectively. Someone strange, someone who got made fun of, kicked around a bit, holed up in a bedroom, lonely as heck, wishing myself into fantasy worlds. 20, 30 years later, I'm standing next to James Cameron on the set of Avatar during the Battle of Home Tree. Sigourney Weaver's in front of me. I'm standing in the middle of the battle because the cameras can't see me. They can only see those little dots on everybody's bodies and faces. And Cameron is next to me directing these actors, these performers. Absolutely astonishing. In that moment, I thought, how is it possible that this could be the same life? Well, it is indeed the same life. Evidence that what we can dream can actually come true if you know how to figure it out. In addition to participating in those projects, we got to develop our own story worlds and have them play out across multiple media platforms as well. So transmedia storytelling is a tool. It's a technique. It's the process of conveying messages, themes, or storylines to a mass audience through the artful and well-planned use of multiple media platforms. I say artful because there is a storytelling technique to moving across multiple media that not many people have mastered quite yet, but it is a rising art form. And when you do it well, you will create something that's enormously compelling and can be enormously lucrative. Transmedia storytelling is also distinguished by the fact that it isn't just a lean back experience. There is an architecture for dialogue built into the transmedia experience because the fans need to want to know what happens next. The fans need to be incentivized to jump across these different media platforms the way that I got on a bus at 12 years old to go all the way outside of Honolulu to the American Movie Theater in order to see the Kikaider feature film that was only playing at a single theater on the whole island. That is desire. That is, I need to know what happens next, and I will work hard to get there. Think of transmedia storytelling, where each media platform is a kind of musical instrument, right? The TV is the piano. Your mobile phone is a violin, right? Feature films or streaming are drums. Individually, they all work, and you could actually be fine on your own with those individual media platforms. But when you piece them together, when you move them together, you can have a symphonic kind of narrative, something that's beautiful and plays seamlessly across an array of media. In the old school, you watched the movie, read the novel, played the game, and the totality is less than the sum of its parts. It's kind of dissatisfying because it's repetitive, and actually the storytelling kind of gets worse and worse, doesn't it? With transmedia storytelling, the pieces of content are almost like puzzle pieces, and you do the work of putting those puzzle pieces together. When they fit, it's delightful. We love continuity. We love canon. We love watching those Marvel movies and seeing references to older Marvel movies and how it all kind of fits together. It's delightful. We have a euphoric feeling, and we want to share the experience with others. A brand or entertainment story world is an ongoing narrative that lives beyond any single movie, video game, or TV show. Story worlds encompass them all. So a story world doesn't have to be just, Star Wars or the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It can be Apple products, right? That's a kind of story world, because all these different devices serve different purposes in our lives, and yet there is a continuity between them. There is also, of course, the things like the Trump narrative, right? That narrative existed across many media platforms. Some people felt maybe too many. And it was loud and integrated and chaotic, and there were people who just loved it. So that was a story world in and of itself. A good franchise story world is one that yields a great characters, people that you really empathize with, but also raises questions and events that promote dialogue. The way we love sports teams, right? A sports team is a story world. There's the team itself, the games that we watch on TV, the radio discussion, the newspaper articles, and the online groups that discuss the team. That's a kind of transmedia story world, right? It's got this this kind of collectability and community. The reason why you would want a transmedia story world is because in this day and age, creating content, especially if you're ambitious and you're doing this for movies and TV shows and streaming, transmedia extends the life of your intellectual property. It's kind of super long form storytelling, right? It reaches audience members on the platform they like to be on, and does so in ways that leverage the features of the platform. In doing so, of course, you're selling more content, and that increases revenue streams. Also, there's licensing and merchandising, because you can develop partnerships that are generating more stories and more content, and therefore selling more product. Transmedia storytelling promotes user-generated content. Those YouTube Easter egg videos or fan videos, or the arguments that fans have over your story world. It they inspire love and devotion, fan advocacy, the desire to share and talk about your world. Good transmedia makes people kind of think about what happened before, right? So they're going to run back and look at the older content, whether that's old Marvel movies or old Star Wars content, to see what the new stuff is referencing. So it keeps your catalog, your library active. It forces us to think as storytellers a little more deeply about what we have to say, because we have to sustain these story worlds. And in order to do so, we need to make some strong points and to truly connect and resonate with this audience. And finally, transmedia storytelling, and this is only just getting underway. There's a whole new design sensibility that is rising around transmedia storytelling. How do you tell an epic long-form story that is not necessarily linear, that is not necessarily even consigned to a single media platform? Well, you have to think about it the way an artist is thinking about expressing themselves in this new and spectacular way. Which isn't to say you can't tell these stories on a budget. Starlight Runner has worked on documentaries and smaller budget projects, designing animated projects and things like superhero kindergarten for more modest audiences and budgets. And we've done so quite effectively. We're not the only ones who've done it. The Lizzie Bennett Diaries, check that out sometime, was a wonderful transmedia narrative that happened some years ago that traversed different media and was enormously compelling, but done on a shoestring budget. So let's get into the beats of story world development. Step one, you got to start with what you've got. Okay. Sometimes, we'll be handed a screenplay, right? So the story world of the screenplay is about 120 pages long, but the edict that's given to us by the owner of the screenplay, it could be a movie studio or their partners, is to be able to generate many, many hours of content. And again, it cannot be repetitive. So we have to build out the story world. We have to mine that script and look at all the locations, the objects, the characters, the references that are made to things that happened before the script, or that things that are happening while the script is happening, but you can't see them, they're happening off screen, or even the things that are happening after the script is over. And we have to build out that story world so that it can accommodate comic books and video games and novels. In the three situations you see on this screen, there were a lot of fun because effectively we were handed objects. Mattel gave us Hot Wheels cars. Coca-Cola gave us, well, a bottle of Coke, and Wizards of the Coast handed us a bunch of cards. So for the cars and maybe even the soda pop, I thought to myself, this isn't my specialty. I don't know what to do or say around these things. How do we build a story world out of a brand? What I discovered and what I'm sharing with you is that the first thing that's important to do is to find yourself in the material. Transmedia storytelling, and in fact, any entertainment storytelling is hard. You have to be extremely passionate because there are a million things that get in the way budget limitations. Everyone is there to tell you no. And yet you have to forge on and make things happen. So the way to do that is to find yourself in the material, because there's nothing that's more important than the things that are important to you. So I ask you, as I ask myself, what internal struggles are you grappling with? I mean, in your life, right? What issues deeply concern you? What mysteries in life are you trying to unravel? What conflicts are you trying to resolve? What lessons will you impart before you depart? Now, I guess you didn't think this would turn into a psychiatry session, but seriously, being able to grapple with these questions and start thinking about the answers to these questions truly helped me to find what's important about the storytelling that that can be built on these brands or anything, these movies that I work with. So when I looked at those Hot Wheels cars, of course I studied the brand. I studied what Mattel had to tell me about those Hot Wheels cars. And I studied all of the commercials and the products that Mattel had created over the years. I even studied how the fans responded to Hot Wheels over the years, what it is that they loved about it, how kids played with the cars. Okay, so all of those factors needed to be a part of the story that I'd be telling about Hot Wheels. But at the same time, what's truly going to bring it to life? What's going to make kids remember those stories for 20 or 30 years after they experience them? Well, if you look at that photo on the left, that kid, that driver's Puerto Rican. And the story of Hot Wheels World Race, which traversed multiple media platforms, animated series on Cartoon Network, video games, comic books, all kinds of toys and accessories. Well, it was 2002 when we got the assignment. And instead of it being about winning a race as an individual, I created a bunch of teams that were international and would have to wind up teaming together in order to win the race and solve the greater problem, the challenge that all of the racers were facing. We can not have to be a team of one. We can unite and solve the problems of the world together. A response I felt was important at the time in 2002 and 2003. A few years later, Coca-Cola's Happiness Factory. Well, what is the Happiness Factory? It exists between your ears. Your brain is a happiness factory. And that story was all about optimism and finding ways to solve problems despite a terrific adversity. And finally, Magic the Gathering. Those cards became my Dungeons and Dragons story world, but what it really became was the story of a young outsider who was scarred by an early trauma and who had great potential, but a lot of fierce things. The problems of poverty, the prejudices that authority figures felt about him were against him. And the Shadow Mage was the story of how he would overcome that kind of adversity. In each situation, deeply personal aspects of myself were being communicated in rather popular ways. Number three, what is the fundamental message? Transmedia is long-form storytelling. It is kind of epic narrative, and great epics play theme and variation on singular, powerful, unique, and resonant messages. Storyworlds succeed because they are, they contain unique aspirational themes. Extremely dark story worlds don't tend to last very long, and we kind of move away from them. They also don't sell many toys. We have found that it is better to think about a more optimistic aspect to anchor your story world's messaging. In Pirates of the Caribbean, what we discovered about it came from Johnny Depp's a kind of a way of being. He was kind of doing this balancing act between the regimented pseudo nobility of the United Kingdom and the wild savagery of the untamed Caribbean. And he thumbed his nose at both. But really what he did was he struck a balance between them. And in doing so, he is unharmed. He is someone who can affect change. He achieves a state of grace. So we have to sense these themes or variations on them in every extension of your Storyworld franchise. We have to understand long-form storytelling if we're doing a transmedia narrative, right? The traditional beginning, middle, end kind of approach is not conducive to a sprawling adventure that takes place across different media, or even even a town like Springfield from The Simpsons, or Adventure Time, right? The characters move forward in time in a kind of linear fashion, not always, but there are multiple paths, and there are things that are happening off screen that are active and alive. We have to think about new ways to look at our story universe. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there are multiple timelines, even, because we're learning that there are different dimensions in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We can move forward in time with the films, but not always, right? Black Widow takes place many years ago. The WandaVision is filling in a gap between the end of Endgame and the beginning of, say, Spider-Man's most recent film, and so forth. You can do that with transmedia storytelling because you've structured this kind of super narrative that is a living, breathing universe, a kind of sphere of activity that is ongoing with multiple characters all over the place. The BBC is currently doing this with Doctor Who, with a transmedia implementation called Time Lord Victorious. It doesn't even use the TV series, right? Chris Chibnall's story is separate and independent from this transmedia implementation, but the BBC carefully designed how this implementation would operate across these different media, and they all kind of fit together. And you don't even need to read all of them in order to understand what's going on. The High Republic in Star Wars is doing the same thing. In Storyworld development, you want to balance cosmology and mystery, right? How does your story world work? What are the metaphysics of it? What are the intangibles that make it all work, right? Cosmologies convince us of the reality of fantasy. They are the force or warp drive. They are foundational to the cultures and belief systems of the characters we encounter. And I don't put science fiction here, I put Schitt's Creek here. Because when you watch this wonderful series, this story world is unfolding as a fully realized universe. Every character in Schitt's Creek is living their own life. And as they crisscross, we see them on screen, but somehow we are convinced that they leave the picture and are still doing something and interacting with one another. And there is a tone to how they interact, almost like a stylization that is kind of cosmic, and that's the magic that holds that story world together. There is an internal logic to these worlds, whether again it's The Simpsons or Adventure Time or Star Wars, so that it's not kitchen sink fantasy, right? Marvel has ray guns and magic and gods and aliens, but a lot of work is given to at least the lip service that explains how these things can coexist in the same universe. Somebody is thinking of this and suggesting it in these stories, and it somehow sounds convincing. We buy it and go with it, right? Don't answer all the questions. Avoid that temptation. A lot of us nerdy world builders want to be able to sit there and answer all the questions, but that bogs things down in exposition, and it's too much information. We ought to leave holes in our cheese to create big old blocks of storytelling Swiss cheese that fans will be tempted to fill. It's questions that they will try to answer or speculate about, and that's where you're getting this kind of Easter egg video industry, where fans are taking apart and atomizing your content to try and figure out what's really going on. We're almost done here, people, and this is like really, really important. This is collective journey storytelling, this new modality of narrative that I've been observing and that I'm tremendously excited about. So here's really the secret sauce that we're talking about in transmedia storytelling and story world development. Your story world, think of it as a system in need of repair, right? Think of not that circular hero's journey or that linear beginning, middle, and end. Think of all the characters in your universe and how each of those characters represents a different aspect, a facet on a gigantic gem that's held together, and yet that gem is flawed. There's a problem, and some of those characters are benefiting from that flaw, but a lot of characters are suffering from that flaw. Some characters may be benefiting on a secondary basis, right? They're being paid by the primary characters who are benefiting from the flaw to defend them, right? Even though they're being harmed by the flaw, they're making money or benefiting somehow, so they become enforcers, right? There are others who aren't even aware of the flaw, right? And they're just living their lives. And then, of course, there are some of our protagonists that not only are becoming aware of the flaw or are negatively impacted by the flaw, but they are coming to realize that if nothing is done about this flaw, it could be self-terminating, right? So look at Game of Thrones as a collective journey narrative. You have all of these factions who've been playing the Game of Thrones for all these years, and they harm each other, they destroy each other, and they attain incredible wealth along the way. There are victims and victors all through. But the problem is they're ignoring something that they put a wall up in front of, and that is the fact that winter is coming. Those White Walkers are not going to stay behind that wall forever. There is a flaw in the system. And the beauty of Game of Thrones is that some of these characters start to become aware of this fatal flaw, and try to reconcile with one another, right? So we are looking at things through the perspectives in Game of Thrones from all these different characters. We empathize, we sympathize even with some of the ones that are awful, because they kind of have their reasons and their philosophies for why they're behaving the way they're behaving. So we've adopted an almost a-perspectivist approach from a storyteller point of view. We're actually respecting and empathizing with each of our characters. They're not snidely whiplash villains, well, except for that King Joffrey. But eventually, the journey of these characters intersects, and there are conflicts, but also there are attempts to solve the problem. And it isn't necessarily about asserting one character's right on another character's wrong. It's about making space to try and understand and empathize with one another enough to project a possible third kind of answer. We call this third mind, a solution that may spontaneously manifest as a result of these conflicts and discussions. And that solution may solve the problem, right? In Orange is the New Black, there was that program toward the end, spoilers, about being able to generate money, funds for women who left prison so that they could benefit and not engage in recidivism. That was something that was invented fictionally within the Orange is the New Black universe, and then wonderfully manifested itself in real life because the producers and stars of the show helped to develop an actual program for women in prison. This is the beauty of transmedia storytelling. But we don't stop there. We don't stop at a solution because there's still resentment. There's still the pain and anguish we inflicted on each other through the course of the narrative. It is necessary for us to reconcile. We must, avoid repeating these cycles by empathizing, understanding, apologizing, and coming to terms with one another so that these don't just rotate over in cycles. Finally, your story world is a gift of wisdom to our world, okay? So it's not just about creating these incredible sweeping experiences or these technically savvy, engaging narratives. Every bit of content needs to contain wisdom. This is my advice to you. Wisdom that fuels the narrative engine. And you'll know it's doing that because the lattice work of your super narrative, the ladder that you're building into these stories are rungs comprised of education and action, right? There's the wisdom, the things that your characters learn, but it's not enough to learn them. The characters must take action in order to resolve the problems. Learn, action, learn, action. We're climbing up out of the prison that is the reality of the characters from where they started, right? So you're basically doing what was done for me as a storyteller or as somebody experiencing those stories. My teachers were Sherlock Holmes and Gandalf and Mr. Spock and Kirk. They were wonderful, and I took from them and applied them to my life, and was able to realize that I was in a prison, and was able to climb out to, well, it was a greater prison, right? We're always going to be in some kind of construct that we're projecting with our minds, but it opens up possibility. It gives us the roots, the likes of which I took from the Baruch projects to Avatar. When you take all this, you're going to need to be practical and apply a strategy. How do you break the story into your driving platform, meaning the platform that most people are going to see, and the supporting platforms? On each platform, how can you take advantage of the unique features of that medium? Look, you don't have to know all of this right now, but it pays to know somebody who does. When I needed to know about the production process in a podcast or a mobile app, I found somebody or did some research and figured it out, right? Get someone who does know. Even if you're a beginner, if you're good, people will support you. And so it's important for us to build communities of interest. That's what's happening at Creative Lab in Hawaii, and that's what's happening in your dialogue with me, because I, Jeff Gomez, am now a part of your community of interest. And then we have to strategize. I call it integrated transmedia strategy. How do we develop a sense of how this is going to happen, how it's going to work? I wish I had time to get into all the details. A few final points. A wonderful and inexpensive a new medium that is all the rage in Hollywood and is being picked up for all kinds of content are the audio, podcasting, audio drama, audio books. This is a tremendous way to get exposure for your story world. If you support it with social media and put yourself out there, you could theoretically get people to engage with your narrative, and that helps sell it to these bigger and more expensive media platforms. And finally, there's virtual production. There's these new technologies that use video game engines and can go live and engage people, you know, in these kind of virtual worlds that are not terribly expensive to do. We're building one right now for Ultraman. In fact, I'm announcing it here for the first time. In a little over a week, we're going to be running Seven-Gar Fight, an actual Ultraman live action tokusatsu show that will be appearing outside of Tsuburaya Imagination, which is a streaming service in Japan that was exclusive. Now we are going to launch it exclusively in the United States in a virtual event, a Seven-Gar Fight. We're going to put a link on all my social media in just a couple of days for people to buy tickets and come see this incredible thing. So again, look, people, one of my dreams come true to be able to produce a virtual production or any kind of production that involves my favorite characters, Ultraman and the various kaiju. No story, no glory, people. Thank you so much. I coach people directly, and all you have to do is reach out to me if you'd like some career coaching. There is a cost involved, but it's a 6-episode kind of course that I give individually to people who want to achieve their dreams in the entertainment business. And you can also jump onto my social media. My email is jeff@starlightrunner.com, at Jeff_Gomez on Twitter, and reach me through LinkedIn. There you go. Thank you so much.
Flawless ending, Jeff. Thank you so much for that presentation. We have a lot of questions in the chat. We'll try to get to all of them. We are limited on time. So Jeff, if you're okay with it, I say we hang on for 2 or 3 more minutes and answer some audience questions. Does that sound good?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Miles has been sitting here for about an hour on the question of what ecosystems does Hawaii need to develop for the next phase of transmedia storytelling?
Wow. Well, you're doing it right now. A creative lab is a wonderful a start for creating that ecosystem. Education really is vital. So I would love to see a transmedia multi-platform narrative and collective journey narrative taught in high schools and universities across the state. I've developed curricula, and it's been adapted here in New York and in various states around the country, California, but also in places all around the world. So that's something I think is really vital. Education, and then the buildup of the media industry in Hawaii proper, which is, it's underway. There was a little pause for the past year, but I think it's going to bounce back and be tremendous.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Let's see, we still have questions coming through, and we apologize if we can't get to every single one of them, but Marsha asked a great question, which is great for independent filmmakers like HFC. How can we start Storyworlds without trying them on a single medium first? How do you kind of brainstorm through the transmedia narrative process?
The one thing that I would advise would be to create a little Bible, a little mini Bible for even if you have an independent film script. What's the world like, right? So who are the characters? What are the locations? What is the philosophy of this world? What is the essence of the messaging of this world? Create a little chronology. What happened before, during, what's happening off screen, and what happens after, and that's kind of your guide. That can serve as the basis for different media. I've seen independent filmmakers do that, and then even though it is an independent film, they put up a website, that's got some cool backstory or something that resonates with the project. The Blair Witch Project was king of transmedia, and that was 1999, and they had like 40 grand to do everything. It really worked. Study the case study of the Blair Witch Project for fantastic advice on how to do this at the independent level.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that question. Man, the chat is really popping. So you really spurred some conversation here. Let's take it a step further to Hollywood. Chris Cato asked, do you think decision makers in Hollywood and elsewhere are becoming more transmedia savvy as well? You talked about the virtual production and audio. What else can Hollywood do to help the filmmakers out?
Oh, well, they are becoming more savvy. It's weird. Some of them don't like the word transmedia. What are you going to do? They
Right.
call it multi-platform or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, every studio wants a franchise, right? That's what they also call it, franchise. What pays for us to think about with regard to pitching or putting together something for Hollywood is, again, the script is king still to this day. Everyone wants to know that you know how to write. Everyone wants to know that you've got great characters and a compelling story. But handing in that little mini Bible along with the script to show the producers or the studio that there's a greater world here and that it can work is vital. Look at what Netflix is doing. A lot of the new stuff that they're picking up is for multiple formats, right? He-Man, there's a whole group of things there. Ultraman, which I had a little something to do with, right? It has an anime version. It's got now a feature animation version that's being made in America. That universe is big enough to accommodate all these things. And the other studios are just mad for wanting to pick up something like that. It's got to start, though, with a compelling story.
Absolutely. No story, no glory, right? We still have questions coming in, and a lot of them have to do with actually the story and the narrative component. So I'll ask just this last one and remind the audience that this is going to be posted. It's recorded on Creative Lab Hawaii's Facebook page. That was our #1 top asked questions. Where can I see this awesome presentation again? So I'll end it with our last question for Joseph, and a lot of other people had the narrative question as well. What are the risks in creating these complex collective journey? What are the pitfalls? He's found many storytellers forging a strong, simple foundation and jump right into a complex narrative, creating worlds that unravel quickly. What advice can you give to avoid messing up, essentially?
That's a fantastic question, and you know, we're looking. We have to examine how to optimize these approaches, of course. The pitfall that a lot of writers experience is what I call "and then" syndrome. You know, so the character does this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this, right? So we're rapidly moving through a series of events, and if it's collective journey, we have all these different perspectives. So all the characters are doing, you know, this a lot. There's a movie coming out soon, a musical. I won't name it, but I think you might imagine that has a lot of that, where we're jumping perspectives so much that that we're not getting a powerful through line for the core characters. Mm-hmm. So the bottom line is, make absolutely sure that your arcs, your character arcs, are compelling and powerful. Mm-hmm. You don't have to make it about the assertion of right on wrong. You know, that's kind of tired, but you do have to make sure that there is an emotional development, these realizations, these epiphanies, and these really interesting, compelling solutions to the problem. So again, it's not about beating up physically or psychologically your enemy. It's about being really clever about how to unravel the problem and fix the flaw in the system. Just because you're a perspectivist doesn't mean that you need 42 different perspectives to confuse your audience. That's one of the main problems that I see sometimes in these universe kind of projects.
Thank you so much. And I apologize to everyone else. We couldn't quite get to your answers for sake of time, but again, please go watch this video. And I think you touched on that, answering a lot of people's questions. You know, story is king. And I love the analogy of sports, like American sports is actually a transmedia type of story. We all love a good story, win or die, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. So listen, I'm going to watch, you know, the feedback to the post. And you can post questions there, and I'll try just put my name in, Jeff, you know, Gomez, you know, and put a question, and I'll try to answer any that I didn't get to here. Or you can reach out to me directly, and I'll do my best.
That's so generous of you, Jeff. Yeah, they'll be like, Mary didn't answer my question. She didn't ask it. Well, thank you so much. And again, that was a super inspirational presentation. I learned a lot. I'll definitely be going back and looking at it. I do want to remind the audience that in June, Creative Lab is launching a series of 5 legal clinics, beginning with the subject of copyrights, scheduled for Wednesday, June 2nd at 6 p.m. Hawaii time. The program is going to be led by Martin Shaw, partner of the Hawaii-based law firm. So please go to creativelab.hawaii.gov for registration information. Again, on behalf of Jeff Gomez, Hawaii Filmmakers Collective, the State of Hawaii, Creative Industries, Have a great day. Aloha. Jeff, thank you so much for your time.
Aloha, Mary. Thanks, Michael. And
Thank
thanks,
you, Michael.
everybody. Talk soon.